Hello and welcome to YTV. I am sitting down with Dr. Jill Stein, who was the Green Party's nominee for President of the United States in 2012 and 2016. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Stein.
It's really great to be with you.
So let's start off with a basic question. Why did you want to come speak with Yale students today?
Well, when I got the invitation, I was just honored and delighted. There's no way in the world I would have said no. And, coming to speak at Yale, I think it's so important right now for us to be having an intergenerational conversation. And coming out of the election, the real energy, I'd say going back to 2012, it was really clear that the energy was on the campuses, that it's the younger generation, which is really taking it on the chin of from a predatory economy, the climate crisis, wars that don't end, which are bankrupting our economy. It's young people who are really shouldering what this means in terms of jobs, income, climate, and student debt. So to my mind, this is the engine of social change right here on campus.
So perfect. So let's talk about college campuses. I always talk about free speech on college campuses. So recently there have been instances of colleges canceling controversial speaker events due to protests on campus and potential safety concerns. More recently, UC Berkeley canceled Ann Coulter's speaker event. Do you think avoiding controversial speakers on campus is a threat to free speech? Is it a dangerous trend?
In general, yes, but when those speakers are going to, for example, blow the whistle on undocumented students, when they're going to reveal information that will put people at risk, as some of these speakers have threatened to do, that is a problem. And when people are coming and espousing violence and the assault on human rights, then that creates conditions that are definitely a safety concern. So I think it's important to balance those two things against each other. I think we want to err on the side of free speech, but when that free speech endangers public safety, then sometimes you have to pull back.
Okay, so if there is a speaker who is strictly ideologically at odds with students, but there's no threats to safety, you think that they should be able to speak on campus, and you disagree with the students who are protesting in those instances?
Yes, but my understanding is that the students who have protested have had good cause and concerns about safety. There are some instances where I think it's really important, to register public disapproval for neo-fascists, for people who are xenophobic or assaulting human rights. It's important for us to stand up and express our opposition, but I do believe that it's important to preserve free speech so that they should be allowed to speak, but that the protests should be allowed to be held.
Okay, so for our next question, so recently one of the residential colleges, which is sort of a dormitory at Yale named Calhoun College, was renamed after decades of controversy. Many argued that the legacy of John C. Calhoun was largely dominated by his defense of slavery and contribution to a new, more extreme justification of slavery. This received national news. Do you think that colleges and universities should be rigorous in assessing the legacies of namesakes and change building names accordingly? Do you think this could turn into a slippery slope? I just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Obviously there's a lot of resistance to that kind of institutional change, so I'm not especially worried about the slippery slope because there's just a lot of inertia on that slope. But I do think it's really important for our institutions of all sorts, but including higher education, which is supposed to be about our ideals. It's supposed to be about the foundation of society. And many of these schools were built, by slaves. Many of the Ivy League schools were in fact built by slaves and slave labor, and the White House and so on. So I think it's really important for us to, to make ourselves whole as a society and to address that legacy of racism, because it is a living legacy. And in fact, I think it's not only our names. I myself am a proponent of reparations and of a national conversation about race so that we can address the ways in which the outflow of slavery still exists in our society with unconscionable economic disparities, educational disparities, mass incarceration of people of color. This is a real problem. If it was just an issue of names, not such a big deal, but this really impacts people's lives in a big way.
And so you do think that colleges should be taking a closer look at the names of buildings and,
yes,
based on legacy, change the name?
Exactly, because this legacy has real impact on people's lives.
Okay, great. So now we're going to turn into the political system and elections. Many criticize Green Party presidential candidates for splintering liberal politics into multiple coalitions, thus giving Republicans an advantage in some races. What is your response to this?
So you have to close your eyes to the facts in order to think that, because actually what exit polls showed was that Greens, the vast majority of Greens, would not come out to vote if only given the choice of a Democrat and a Republican.
So maybe a majority, but not all Greens.
Well, in fact, it was 61% of Greens that would not have voted, and of the 39% that would have voted, 1/3 would have voted for Donald Trump and not for Hillary Clinton.
Okay.
So the mistake is to say that the solution to right-wing extremism is to silence political opposition. Actually, because democracy depends on political opposition. We don't want to be like Iran or the Soviet or Russia and just say there are two legitimate political parties and everybody else should roll over and be quiet. The point is we should have a diverse political system, and we can do that through a ranked choice voting system. You shouldn't have to choose between voting your values or voting your fears. You should be able to just vote your values.
Sure, but so maybe if a ranked choice voting system were to emerge, then Green Party candidates wouldn't splinter the liberal.
But remember, they're not really splintering the liberal vote. They're mostly
you
staying
acknowledge
home.
that 2/3 of the 41% would
not have voted.
Okay.
Oh, all right,
no,
right. But 2/3 of the 41%, yes.
So you are in this.
But that's small. I mean, and what's the alternative?
Could end up overturning elections.
As opposed to just having two state parties that are sanctioned and silencing political opposition. That gives up the very essence of democracy, which is having vigorous debate and political opposition. I don't think you can justify it. The point is, let's not choose between two horrible options that are not democratic. Let's have a truly democratic option, which is simple. It's not like this is expensive or this is some lofty goal we can never achieve. This is easy. The state of Maine just initiated it by voter referendum.
So you would prefer political diversity over promoting a liberal agenda? Is that
well, if it was a liberal agenda, but actually, if you look at it carefully, what happened under Barack Obama? Worse carbon emissions than even happened under George Bush, massive expansion of these wars on terror without end, the attack on immigrants, 3 million deported, which is what Donald Trump's goal is as well. So it's really important to recognize that what pretends to be a liberal agenda gets corrupted very quickly if you only have two choices. They will get bought out. It's very important for us to have freedom of choice. That is what democracy depends on. And it's not like the system is some unachievable ideal. This is just plain and simple, easy to do.
From a practical perspective, if the Green Party were to grow in popularity over the next few years and compete for a significant portion of the liberal vote, wouldn't that hand elections to the GOP?
If you presume that we are only going to live in a election system that has us choose the lesser evil. But the lesser evil is not fixing our wars. It's not fixing the climate crisis. It's not fixing our economy. It was under Democrats that Wall Street was bailed out. That in fact the regulatory apparatus was dismantled for Wall Street in the first place.
You're saying you're just as much in line with the Republican Party as you are with the Democratic Party?
No, I don't think. Personally, I don't try to assess which of the parties is worse. What I know is that it's not compatible with our survival. If you're promoting fracking or you're promoting coal, neither one is going to get us to a climate we can survive in throughout this century. And whether you were deported under Barack Obama with a smile, or whether you were deported by by Donald Trump with a scowl. Still, 3 million immigrants were deported under Barack Obama. Whether Wall Street got bailed out by a Republican or a Democrat, it shouldn't matter. What matters is that that's not working. And remember this, the majority of people who voted for Trump were not for him. They were against Clinton and the legacy of Wall Street bailouts, the meltdown of the climate, and the offshoring of our jobs. So more of this neoliberal democratic routine does not get us to a more progressive place. It actually fans the flames of right-wing extremism.
Okay, so I think we're going to get into another quick question here about current events and Trump. Yesterday we saw Marine Le Pen advancing to France's runoff presidential election. Given Donald Trump's rise to power and what we saw in Great Britain with Brexit, with Prime Minister Theresa May's rise to power, why do you think there have been a wave of what could be characterized as right-wing populist movements in the US and Europe, many of which involve components of nativism?
It's exactly that point, that I was making, that when you have a neoliberal agenda, which basically supports financialization of the economy, the power of the banks, the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few, the globalized economy, which essentially hands economic power and privilege to a global economic elite, when working people are thrown under the bus systematically, when austerity is implemented in all of these countries, what you get is right-wing extremism. That's exactly why the Democrats and their agenda, liberal, but it's actually neoliberal in that it supports, greater concentration of wealth, offshoring of our jobs, etc. That agenda and militarism that goes with it to establish market dominance. That's exactly why you see Greens rising up in Europe, because they have had the courage to actually stand up against neo-fascism and against xenophobia that has been too much associated with this neoliberal agenda.
Okay, yeah. I'd actually like to move on to my next question. I'd like to talk a little bit about Russia. Your campaign was sometimes criticized for being hesitant to criticize Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. I wanted to ask whether or not you believe that the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election in order to favor Donald Trump, and what your thoughts are on the situation.
Yeah, so first let me just clarify. We criticized Russia, and in fact, I went to a conference in Moscow, which is what we were criticized for, because there's a photograph of my sitting at a table.
Yes.
But it's important to know I was there in the company of most of the peace advocates in this country who rely on RT in order to get coverage, because unfortunately U.S. media, corporate media, won't cover the peace advocates. So I was there with Ray Flynn, who's one of the foremost advocates of civil liberties and of a peace agenda, Tom Hartman, who's one of the luminaries of the Democratic Progressive Agenda, Jesse Ventura, one of the libertarian leading spokespeople for a progressive agenda. But they're only attacking me because they're very worried about Greens being a threat to business as usual. But we put out a press release when I was there, very critical of Russia. And in fact, that was my message, which is online in a video, what I actually said to the Russian administration, which was to say they were following and are following in the catastrophic footsteps of the United States by bombing Syria, that these wars for oil are not making the Middle East more peaceful, secure, or democratic, and that Russia is following in our footsteps.
So back to the question, do you believe that the Russian government interfered in the U.S. election in order to favor Donald Trump?
So, I think what really interfered with the U.S. election was the revelation, or shall we say, it was, the Democrats' failure to run a good election.
Well,
and the reason that the emails were such a source of controversy was because of their content.
I would love to talk about emails, but we
don't know is, who actually hacked those emails or whether they were leaked.
17 American intelligence agencies have reported evidence of the Russian interference.
No. What they say is that they strongly agree with each other, but they won't release evidence.
The FBI,
if you listen to the veteran intelligence professionals, and that includes Ray McGovern. It also includes William Biney, who was the head of technology for the NSA, who quit because the NSA was spying and violating the Constitution by spying on American citizens. If you listen to those people, they say there is no evidence there. There is not firm evidence. It may turn out we don't have that evidence. Let me say it's commonplace for countries to spy on each other and to try to interfere through public relations campaigns. That's what Voice of America is about. That's what the National Endowment for Democracy is about. You may recall that we not only tried, we totally succeeded in overturning the results of the Russian election under Boris Yeltsin. So this is very regrettable stuff, and the solution requires really an international treaty against cyber warfare. And the U.S. unfortunately has been stonewalling that treaty. That's where we need to move forward.
Okay, last question. Do you see yourself running for president ever again in the future?
I am not envisioning that, but on the other hand, I'm not making specific plans. I am not giving up the fight. The question is, how do we most strategically fight? And for myself, it may be helping other people. It may be running for a different office. I don't know what it is, but I think the battle has been engaged and it's moving in the right direction. And we are kicking up ahead of steam. And it's really important to keep going forward.
Okay, well, we will leave it at that because we are out of time. But thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Stein. And from everyone at YTV, I'm Neeraj Patel. Thanks for watching.
Can you give us a few bars of JoJo?
I thought you'd never ask.
Get out right now. It's the end of you and me.
Can somebody explain to me why everybody